Hello, everyone, and welcome to this APICS and Software AG webinar, Enabling the Smart Real-Time Supply Chains. I'm Aaron, your webinar host, and your presenters are Peter Bolstorff, the Executive Vice President of APICS, and Sean Riley, Global Industry Director at Software AG. I'm going to hand things over to Melinda Spring to introduce our presenters in full. Melinda?
Thank you, Aaron. I'm Melinda Spring, Director of Corporate Programs for APICS. And I'd like to introduce Peter Bolstorff, who is Executive Vice President of Corporate Development, also for APICS. Peter leads the division that supports corporate clients, affiliates, and sponsors of APICS. He is author of Supply Chain Excellence, a handbook for dramatic improvement using the SCORE model, and brings over 20 years of experience in supply chain and operations management to the position. Peter holds a master's degree in industrial education, a bachelor's in mathematics, education, and psychology, and is a SCORE certified instructor and is certified in Six Sigma. Also joining us today is Sean Riley, Global Industry Director for Manufacturing and Transportation for Software AG. Along with over 4 years of experience in the software field, Sean has over 10 years of experience in the supply chain and logistics fields. Sean holds a BA in Business Administration and an MBA with distinction and is a certified Six Sigma Green Belt. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Peter Bolstorff. Peter?
Thank you, Melinda. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce our initial webinar objectives and then talk a little bit about our interactive opportunities within this webinar. The first thing is Sean and I really wanted to get out a definition and answering the question in terms of what is a smart real-time supply chain. We're going to spend then some time talking about characteristics and competitive advantage of having a smart real-time supply chain. And then thirdly, talk about best practices to be able to make your supply chain become smarter and more real-time. So as Aaron alluded to, please pose any questions through the chat window. But Sean and I are also going to introduce a live polling technique to make this webinar as interactive as possible. And with that, I would like to introduce our first poll. Aaron?
Sure, thanks, Peter. So everyone, poll number 1 is on your screen, and this one asks what you'd like to learn more about. So you can check off as few or as many options as you like, so please go ahead and do that now.
This is very helpful in helping Sean and I kind of configure this webinar to those that are interested, and it appears as though we have scoped the initial 3 questions correctly. I can see from the results that we've got incorporating real-time data, how do I achieve competitive advantage, and then how do I leverage global process to optimize performance. Sean, any comments from your end?
Not at this time, Peter, but the poll questions do signify what we plan on covering throughout this webinar.
Perfect. So we're going to cut back to our first question. What is a smart real-time supply chain? So APICS Research each year does a survey from our supply chain leaders of our 250 plus corporate accounts. And we are trying to identify the supply chain strategy drivers. And this kind of summarizes the list. So the top 6 drivers include operational excellence, implementing supply chain performance improvements, developing effective and efficient supply chain organization, improving S&OP, creating a strategy. And the newest one to the top 6 list is this idea of globalizing and managing business processes. Other notables include building some kind of a technology investment roadmap and optimizing existing technology investments. So if I double click on each of the ones in bold, thinking about developing effective and efficient supply chain organization, we've had historical supply chain jobs like the materials manager, master scheduler, supply chain manager, buyer planner. Of recent, we've included things like the demand manager, supply manager. One of the trending questions is, where does the idea of the data manager fit? And that's something that we'd like to just have everybody think about as we go through this webinar. The 6th one, globalizing and managing business process, especially as we are all global. How do we determine which processes are regionally managed, which ones are globally managed? More importantly, how do we start to think about how do we govern those processes? How do we change and adapt them based on the changing supply chain business models? So that's, again, something that we're learning is through our survey. The technology investment roadmap, one of the interesting things that we've had dialogue around is the idea is traditional capacity technology will include things like manufacturing capacity, ERP type packages. But one of the things that we're finding now, people are thinking about, how do I invest in technology that will give me more information? And I think the Industry 4.0, the Internet of Things, and how do I start to get those kind of investments on my roadmap? And then the last one that really affects kind of this webinar content is the idea of optimizing existing technology investments. So lots of folks today have invested in planning systems, execution systems, data warehouse systems. The question becomes is how do I put that together so that I can optimize them all at once? So this then is going to cue me into our second poll slide. What we're interested is we've selected some of this list. We are interested in finding out from our audience standpoint, what are the drivers that are part of your strategic focus? Aaron?
Thanks, Peter. Everyone, this poll is on your screen now. Once again, you can check off as few or as many votes as you like. And go ahead, take a half minute to do just that.
Great. I'm going to, as I'm seeing the numbers roll in here, I got a couple of comments. And then Sean would invite you to comment as well. The top getter was this idea of developing an effective and efficient supply chain. And so one of the things that we've seen trending at APICS with our corporates is this idea of developing a center of excellence. And so the idea that you have global process managers that are, in essence, responsible for the performance of the process globally. So when we think about planning or execution or data, and I think number one dovetails into the very first poll question as well, globalizing and managing business process. Sean?
What I find interesting about the poll response, Peter, is number two, which also dovetail into creating an effective supply chain organization, is how do I effectively support that organization with a technology roadmap that ensures I'm able to bring along my existing systems as well as future-proof future-proof my existing architecture for what I would need in the future that I don't yet know, based on new technologies and new competitive drivers that are entering into the marketplace. And that's a topic that we're definitely going to touch on in both the presentation itself and the use case at the end of the deck.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. So let's transition back to the presentation. So this slide, we talked about supply chain strategy drivers. This slide, I just wanted to speak to, since the 2014 merger of APICS and the Supply Chain Council, APICS has used SCORE as our way to define a supply chain. And for those of you that haven't seen this graphic, it's the integrated processes of plan, source, make, deliver, return, and enable. And you can see the scope spans from supplier to customer. So there's different applications of this graphic. So if we take it from a process standpoint, you can see within plan and how that relates within your organization, how source and deliver relate within the trading partner network. I think there's another application on performance measurement. So when you think about how do I measure process performance, not only within my organization, but towards the customer side and the supplier side, there's an application that says, how do I organize my supply chain globally to be able to manage these processes, which was the subject of the highest poll feedback. There's a material flow aspect of this. So how do I align my capacity, my manufacturing, distribution, and service organization to best move materials back and forth? But one of the things that we found in our special interest group focus forums is the idea that there is a data layer that people are wrestling with and they would like to see how SCORE can be applied to the data management. And then there's another special focus forum focused on the idea of the Internet of Things. So as I have more physical things out there that are collecting more data, how do I effectively manage those processes within that? And I think that's been the research that we found, which has brought us to a very formal partnership and relationship with Software AG to start talking about how do we leverage SCORE to understand at a platform level, enable a smart real-time supply chain. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Sean, and we can talk a little bit more about exactly what is a real-time smart supply chain.
Thanks, Peter. And before we get into the dynamics of the smart real-time supply chain, I'd just like to form the basis for why it's needed or why it's coming about. And there's really two reasons for that. Number one, advances in technologies are allowing for supply chains to be more precise. Some of those technologies include the Internet of Things, having sensors talk to you and give you information continuously, as well as the ability to analyze that information continuously, use it to drive real-time dynamic predictions on that information, and then be able to make smart automatic decisions so that the human element, if you will, in the process is designed on planning how a response should be, not understanding when a response is needed and then deciding what the best response is. On the other side of the coin, there are three external pressures that we found are entering the marketplace. Number one, as well noted by the latest CSCMP annual State of Logistics report, inventory is going to get more expensive. And that means that wonderful safety blanket that hides all problems is going to become an even larger drain on networking capital requirements. Secondly, at the same time, customers, and it's these same customers that use digital apps in their everyday lives, are becoming digital themselves. So it's not just consumers that are demanding the here and now from an information standpoint, but it's going into the business-to-business model also. And that's causing a high range of visibility to be needed across an extended supply chain, so you can answer questions immediately. And then lastly, there is an uptick in manufacturers adopting these digital ecosystems where they're trading information with their partners, with their suppliers, and with their customers in real time, or at the time that those particular entities are capable or that it's needed. And it's those three items that are really driving the need for what is this new real-time smart supply chain that has more control and more precision than previously has been experienced in the marketplace today. So from building the real-time supply chain, in looking at the base functionality, we look at just a few typical applications that are used to run a supply chain throughout an organization. I know what you're thinking. If it was only that simple, everyone would have really, really easy jobs. But in truth, it's a simplistic model of what needs to be done. And that is, at the very lowest level, understanding how I can ensure that those applications talk to each other in my own internal organization without having any black boxes or communication gaps. Secondly, I want to make sure that I'm enabling my customers to speak to me in the time that's best for them. And that means if I need to get point-of-sale demand data, it needs to be as real-time as possible so I can consume that. Or if it's my suppliers, I need to understand what they're producing for me, what the effectiveness of that production is, and when that yield's going to occur. It can't be overstated, the criticalness of ensuring you're able to do that, because that drives your process governance. It feeds the engine of, I want to create an efficient and effective supply chain organization, and I can do that with my process guide, but I have to ensure that the information is providing data that fits within that process at the right time. And I need to be able to do that simply and easily, and more importantly, flexibly. The first key point of a real-time supply chain is to generate action at specific process milestones. And this action can be generated, as the example shows, based on when a barcode is scanned, when an RFID code is read, when an activity such as ship confirm is hit in a WMS, or the lack of a ship confirm being hit when it needs to be hit in a WMS, so that a organization can take appropriate action to ensure that they're either going to receive product on time or ship product to their customer. And more importantly, what is that going to do to my overall supply chain plan? How's that going to impact the forecast that my customers have sent me, or my own internal productivity forecast? Secondly, we want to look at specifically, how can I now begin incorporating continuous streaming data into my supply chain so that I can take action throughout the entire process. And that continuous streaming data, it can come from assets in motion, so the transportation assets themselves. So I understand what's the flow in between warehouses, in between production facilities, to begin looking at how am I performing to my plan? How am I performing against my actual production requirements that I'm receiving in real time based on sensors in my production? So going back to what Peter said earlier about the rise of Industry 4.0, the rise of the connected or smart manufacturer, that's giving the need for, we need to take that same data that's coming off of sensors on production lines and use it to understand and mix with what's coming in from a supply chain perspective. And what gets really interesting is, while typically we think of being able to tap into that production data, tap into the transportation data that can be accessed in real time, products themselves can begin providing updates in terms of their position, their conditions, using the same communication methods, the industrial Internet of Things, as the transportation equipment themselves. While that provides immediate action and allows you to differentiate your near-term performance against a customer, to continually build and continually enable a real-time supply chain, understanding how the process itself, how it's acted on, how it's actually executed, and how that execution ties against performance levels is more critical than ever. Because again, when you look at the ability to use closed-loop analytics to respond to an event or to an issue, you have to understand how I want to respond. And this is critical to driving that continuous improvement function in a real-time supply chain. And then lastly, through your analysis of supply chain performance, both in the upstream supply chain from vendor to enterprise, as well as your downstream performance from enterprise to customer, you're able to understand what parts of this do I truly want to automate? What parts of these actions do I not want a human to touch, because they're either non-value added or certain decisions have to occur in a fast enough time frame so that I can obtain additional transportation capacity, or change transportation nodes, or take action against a particular supplier that's going to be sending me product that I might not necessarily want. And I might not necessarily want that based on what I'm learning about their production methods, what I'm learning about that shipment that's in transit to me, as well as the amount of materials inventory I might already have in this particular location, because I might need to accept the full load of product, or I might need to have the ability to reject it based on my inventory level and my support of a JIT process. And with that, Peter's going to talk to us about connecting the dots.
So one of the things that we've learned from our focus forums is really when you think about building capability, as Sean just described. At the end of the day, smart real-time supply chains actually focus on how do we connect the dots and most importantly, reduce unnecessary complexity. So I used to manage plant with 3M, and I know as we started, and it was in Silicon Valley, and we were doing turnkey packaging around CDs. And so as the complexity of the people, the process, customer expectations on performance and practices increased, we had to find a way to simplify. And so one of the things in terms of leveraging the SCORE framework with the capability build is that the SCORE framework already has the connections. We've already connected the dots between the process and performance metrics at varying layers, between process and best practices, and then specifically as you start to think about the people that are actually operating in that complex environment, the people skills, experiences, aptitudes, and trainings necessary to make sure that they're using the technology at its full capability. So we're going to transition to our second question, which is what are the competitive advantage of smarter, more real-time supply chains? Sean, you're up.
All right, and at this time, I think we actually have our third poll question, Aaron.
Thanks, Sean. And everyone, it is indeed time for our third poll question. This one asks, my largest technical challenge to increasing my supply chain capability is. This one, you select one answer. Go ahead now and cast your vote.
Great. And I should say that we've done polls similar to this in the past at Software AG. And it comes to no surprise that the top two answers are consistently about data. It's always about how do I normalize data around the globe? How do I access it both internally and then with my partners? So it's an interesting paradigm that has continued here. And one of the keys to the real-time smart supply chain is being able to understand how can I get data from my partners, as well as ensuring that my partners are able to give me that data, meaning the enterprise itself can't be responsible for, to give an example of how applications used to work, but having to be responsible for setting up every EDI connection with a partner or with all their partners. Simply because if you're an enterprise of size, it's not uncommon to have 6,000 suppliers with maybe 800 to 1,000 of them are your core suppliers, and then the rest are moderately to seldom used suppliers, but that data still needs to come from them. So having the ability to flexibly set up those connections or have suppliers moderate those connections themselves and the ability to understand when they're not is absolutely a crucial function. So it also goes towards the first of the four key characteristics of the real-time supply chain, which is scalable, flexible connections. And what do we mean by scalable, flexible connections is, as I alluded to earlier, the ability to not only take in EDI transactions, which is the norm from a data sharing perspective, but also be able to supplement with that with customer and supplier-facing portals where less sophisticated users have the ability to quickly and easily upload data. Or for the more sophisticated suppliers, the ability to leverage the Internet of Things with them to understand exactly what's happening in their factories. Secondly, the ability to share data. And traditionally, that's been sharing of demand data from the consumer up into the extended supply chain, but also understanding how is the supply chain performing in unison against that demand data, and how do I continuously understand that without having to run a report or or simply look at this on a ad hoc basis. But how can I put that data in memory, continuously analyze it with a streaming analytics engine to understand what's happening throughout my entire supply chain? Is there a supplier that's over or underperforming based on my plan, how I'm deviating from the plan, and what's expected to occur in the very near future? The third point is that wonderful notion of resiliency, which is layering in not only operational issues, where perhaps an inbound product is delayed, needs to be rerouted, perhaps a supplier is not performing to par in terms of quality or inventory delivery, but also the external environmental issues, which we're all becoming more and more aware of, where it seems like the storm of the century occurs 3 or 4 times a year now, in addition to the changing geopolitical landscape around the globe, and understanding what does my extended supply chain truly look like, and how can I understand when my suppliers are making changes in their network that directly impact my performance. And it's analyzing that data in real time that drives the ability to do that. And the last characteristic, and perhaps the most important characteristic of the real-time supply chain, is industry-leading service and capital requirements. And that's where we're seeing both an increase in levels of customer service out to customers, such as simple metrics as on time in full, but also the reduction of a need of capital to support those requirements. So again, going back to the original pressure of inventories becoming more expensive to hold. So how can I minimize my inbound materials, my work in process, and my finished goods based on, again, the flow of my supply chain, as well as the expected need of my customers, that while they're giving me demand forecasts, their actual need is going to be changing precipitously, and I need to be able to understand and control that. However, while there can be a significant amount of technology in place to support this, to understand what's happening, to drive decision making, to create dynamic predictions based on what's happening now, or what's happening in relation to now and my planned actions, we really come back to basics that truly enable this real-time supply chain. And it's having the ability to understand what are my processes, how are they aligned to my key performance indicators, and then how do I ensure, as the poll question stated earlier, that I have good data, and good data being coming from external sources as well as throughout the enterprise, so that I'm able to incorporate all data sources of my supply chain quickly and easily. And that's something that at Software AG we've worked with many customers on, in virtually guaranteeing that data is consistent, it occurs as frequently as needed, and it's able to be obtained in the right time as easily, as quickly as possible. So the real question is, what value can really be obtained during the journey to a real-time smart supply chain? Because unfortunately, the final pressure that I didn't touch on earlier was time to value. And it seems every quarter that we move forward, the need to realize that time to value shortens and shortens. Peter?
So, yep. Thanks, Sean. So we know a lot about companies and the journey towards supply chain excellence. There have been over 5,000 companies since the inception of SCORE in 1996 that have taken that journey. In fact, whether you admit it or not, everybody's somewhere on that road. Some are further down than the others. Some people are able to stay within the end lines. Some people are in the ditch. So here's what we know about companies who are on that journey and they're moving at a good pace. We know that they rank in the upper quartile of their industry group in shareholder value. Shareholder value would be earnings per share growth over a 3 to 5 year period of time. We also know that their programs, their supply chain improvement programs, have helped achieve a baseline average operating income improvement of 3% of sales. So at the end of the day, for every $100 million in revenue, they have a 3% better value, or $3 million of value versus competitors. We also know that supply chain excellent companies, or those that are moving down that path on a good pace, outperform competitors on all major supply chain indices. We know that because we've been using the ScoreMark benchmarking tool since 1996. We also know that they've committed to an approach, and those, as we'll see in the case study, have picked SCORE. It as a simple way of reducing complexity. So if you start thinking about Sean's earlier slide about connected enterprises and the metrics in the process, and you go back to I'll call it my bubble chart, plan, source, make, deliver, return, and enable from supplier to customer, that simple graphic allows both an elegant discussion around what my supply chain is and where am I strong and where do I need to improve, but it also has enough depth to be able to start asking the questions around, what do I need to do from a maturity standpoint. The other thing is the companies who are on that journey towards supply chain excellence have figured out how to incorporate SCORE into their continuous improvement supply chain assessment approach. Other advantages that they've seen, and this has been noticed more in the last 5 years, is this idea of using a formal process improvement methodology to do one of two things: either migrate to a different technology platform, cloud versus non-cloud, or ERP system to another ERP system, or rolling out a current ERP system to other geographies in the world. What we found is if you start with a level 4 blueprint that is, from a global process management standpoint, has been adopted and approved, you get faster implementations with more functionality, and the caveat to there is I get back up to performance in half the time. So let me transition to the next and last question before we get into the Q&A, is what are the best practices that will help you today on your journey become smarter and more real time? And I guess my comment that I'd like to make is you go through these webinar presentations, and sometimes when I'm going through them and I'm on the listening side of it, your stress level kind of goes up. Boy, I wish I could do that, or boy, there's no way I can do that, or my organization's just not ready. My point, I guess, to the audience is that you can start anywhere. I think the point is just start, and then use the building blocks that we've discussed to be able to move along. So what I've done is I've kind of highlighted, I'll call it my favorite 4 slides or content pieces that have helped companies move faster in the supply chain excellence journey. So the first one is really using a proven roadmap. And this one is based on about 150 projects that have been done over the last probably 12 years. So there's 5 steps: engage, define the supply chain that you want to pilot on, analyze all dimensions of the supply chain, and I'll talk about 3 of them. Included in that would be your process. In step number 4 is really plan for the list of changes and improvements that you want to make, and then really launching the series of implementations. From this picture, though, the hardest and the longest step, and the one that actually predicts the greatest amount of success, is engaging the business units. And so what we found in the last 2 years or so is as we have more center of excellence driven, globally process managed improvements, there still is the necessity to go get a business partner within your own organization to engage around a supply chain improvement. And I remember back in the day when 3M spun off Amation in the mid-90s, and I was part of a center of excellence. Even though I was within the company, I was still sometimes viewed as an outsider from an engagement standpoint. So proven roadmap. So this is deliverable number one. Pick an approach. This one has been tried and true with folks that have used the SCORE framework. The second one is measure performance. And to Sean's earlier point is in using the SCORE metric scheme, you've got 5 categories of metrics. I've picked the ones that are the most frequently measured. You get a benchmark, parity, advantage, superior. From a competitive standpoint, you have targeted level of performance. Where do I want to be? And then you have a gap. And so it's that gap that really defines the opportunity as you start to move down your supply chain excellence journey. The second analysis that I want to talk about is the process analysis. And the words are blurry for a reason, so don't worry about reading them. The idea here is using a standard set of process definitions, understanding how those processes link to one another, both inside your company and outside, understanding how they're performing. In this particular case, they're color-coded. Green's good. Yellow means we need to improve it. Red means it's either broken or missing. And I think as we've seen people utilize SCORE, they've started to move down in the levels that they're making use of. So, for example, now we have many of our best affiliates that are going down to level 4 and level 5. And then the last one then is making sure that your folks, based on where they're performing at and what their level of comprehension is, can relate it back to things that they need to know from a training and education standpoint. Sean, I am going to turn it over to you because I'm going to have some more water before I cough the audience off the phone. And then we'll both talk a little bit about the case study and then open it up to Q&A. Sean, back to you.
Sounds good. So we're going to finish up with a case study in one particular company that focused on really how do I go about enabling the base functionality that we talked about from how do I get my processes, how do I get my people right, and how do I begin taking automated actions when exceptions are identified. And what DuPont was really looking for, other than the obvious answers which every company is searching for, is repeatable simplicity. How do I make supply chain execution repeatable and not a heroic effort every time an issue occurs, every time something unexpected happens? How am I able to drive best-in-class performance based upon my key metrics that I've selected to run my processes against? So what DuPont really wanted to tie into was looking at how do I build this strong foundation. And there were 3 key focuses that they put into place. Number one, how do I make everything transparent to all users? How do I make workflows transparent? How do I make performance transparent? How do I make the connections between various business divisions transparent to each other so everyone understands how they fit into a very complex global supply chain? Secondly, how can I make people better accountable in terms of their performance on their roles in the specific end-to-end process? And that is, we want to understand and target effort towards a specific endeavor that every single person can control. So instead of having the ubiquitous, we want to raise on time in full, that particular metric was broken down into actions that individuals could control in their own roles, in their own business functions. And then lastly, how do I really focus on the people and the processes to understand how I can build a desire and a willingness within the organization to change, to focus on supply chain excellence? Because while we can use technology, while we can ensure that we're able to follow and understand our processes. At the end of the day, ensuring that people are in line and supportive of the actions that are being taken and enthusiastic about it is the final key to success. And most importantly, the ability to execute against those keys based on their own skill sets. So in this journey, DuPont, after 6 months of process alignment, was able to do two things. Number one, improve their global promise to policy by 36%, which is a phenomenal figure, while at the same time reducing their inventory investment, which showed, in my opinion, tremendous results from how are we able to leverage three keys to generate our complete supply chain results. So in summary, there were three key learnings that DuPont had. Number one, the more visibility that you're able to provide between how your processes interacts with your strategy ensures that critical alignment of the persons that are driving that are able to change their own behaviors and become enthusiastic about ensuring that they're able to participate and drive value in the new process. Secondly, and Peter touched on this earlier, how can we engage all functional levels of an organization? How can we ensure that there aren't any outsiders, even while getting the attention of people or departments that might be engaged and focused on nominal everyday issues, because their job is to keep the business running? And then lastly, how do we ensure we're able to sustain and set a governance based on outcomes, as well as the processes that were used to derive those outcomes, so we can sustain the transformation indefinitely and continuously improve upon the results that we're able to obtain. And the three critical components that DuPont focused were ERIS, SCORE, and the business process management tools to ensure that as exceptions occurred throughout the process, that they were able to be identified and acted upon quickly. So, Peter, do you have any comments on the case study before we open up for questions and answers?
I think DuPont was also, they heavily invested in developing their people. And so when you look at their supply chain talent development program, again, when you look at the full transformation journey, they tick the box on performance, strategy, and process, but they also are I'll call it a model in terms of how they're developing their people, and their supply chain talent. So I would add that to the pile as well.
Great.
Questions? Yep, I was going to say we're at that magic moment in the webinar where we have questions. And so, Aaron, if you want to explain that process, that would be great.
Sure. So, everyone, it is about time for your questions. Some brief notes. There is a new poll on your screen which asks which types of follow-up you might like. And for this, you can check off all that apply. There's a number of boxes there. So have a look through and check them off. So this question to start is for the both of you. And Peter, maybe I'll put it to you first. What is the biggest distractor to real-time supply chain?
Well, it's funny. That's a great question. And so there's probably two levels of answer. But if I go back to that proven roadmap, I think it's getting organizational buy-in that's actually part of their strategic intent or their strategic direction. Because I think everybody, can talk about, hey, I need to move my supply chain agility and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to derive some kind of a financial benefit from it. And it has to be very simple, and you need, business units to subscribe to that, so that they can start down the journey. You can't go through the process without organizational leadership. I guess that would be my point of view in terms of, one of the survey questions that we ask often is what causes your supply chain performance to vary? and in its organizational support. John?
So the biggest distractors that I see to the real-time supply chain, and it goes back to the poll question. Number one is data complexity. Organizations have either believed that data is too difficult to obtain, or it can't be obtained from their internal applications or their supply chain network itself. And that's always an interesting challenge to overcome, because there are two different issues that occur. Number one, how can we get the data, which is a fairly technical issue that has multiple different methods to conquer. And then number two, what data can we access based upon our discussions and agreements with our partners? What will they give us to support our business? And that's frankly, the more difficult of the two questions. The other key distractor that I really see is not tying technology to context. And what I mean by that in a specific example is hearing, how should I put this? Hearing frequently, we want to launch an Internet of Things initiative. Great. That's wonderful. But the real answer is, how do I want to further enable my supply chain? And perhaps the Internet of Things is a part of it, but there's also existing connections that are a part of it as well. And at the end of the day, I want to focus on what technologies are out there to enable my objectives, rather than what are the hottest new technologies that I simply want to look into and begin forcing into a already busy ecosystem.
All right, Sean, Peter, thank you for both taking that question. And Peter, this question is for you. What are the current factors that are driving inventory carrying costs upward?
So great question. So when you look at how SCORE defines inventory carrying cost, there's the opportunity cost. So that's just inventory times your cost of money. You've got shrink, which is keeping track of your inventory. You got obsolescence, and one of the things that we often see in times of crunch is, and it takes some tough decisions to be able to throw stuff away, but oftentimes you'll see companies talk about, if I could only just get rid of the anchor around the anchor on my ankles, my active stock is actually turning pretty well. And then of course there's taxes and all the other things that go along with that one. Those are the big factors that drive inventory carrying costs.
All right, moving right along, Sean, let's bring you back in for this one. What are the SCORE enablers for ARIS and BPM?
So the SCORE enabler for ARIS and BPM is the SCORE model has been created and is available for immediate use in the ARIS business process analysis tool. The ARIS BPA tool is able to import directly with the right click of a mouse into a business process management tool to allow you to automate and identify exceptions as they occur throughout your supply chain processes. So very simply, that is the SCORE enabler and how it ties to ARIS and BPM.
All right, the next question is for both of you, and maybe Sean, you can start off with this one. How do we manage unplanned internal changes, since every function has their own metrics or goals to meet? That's
a really good question, and I saw that pop up on the poll, and I'm glad we were able to get to that one, Aaron, because it really has to focus on alignment. And when you have issues in terms of internal changes, affecting the individual business functions, that's to me, it's the number one indicator that your metrics aren't aligned across your entire supply chain to support a key outcome. And the basic key outcome that I always like to talk about is on time in full. So, for example, if you have a warehouse cost efficiency metric that is at the detriment of serving the customer and driving that, then you'll see as changes are made, the particular warehouse manager or the particular supply chain manager in charge of that function will make changes based upon what they see as the largest benefit to themselves, not as how they can specifically benefit that key outcome of on time and full. That's not to say that organizations don't have to be cost conscious when they're dealing with those types of operations, because let's be honest, we all do. But if you're able to accurately align individual metrics to key outcome metrics, and that's part of the score delivery model, you're able to ensure that the people that you place into those specific roles, regardless of whether the person changes or the environment around the person changes, that they understand what's needed to perform and how they're supporting the overall organizational objectives.
All right. Moving right along here then, Peter, a question about DuPont. Where did DuPont's SC talent come from, and how many people came from outside the traditional SC function?
So a great question. So I did a co-research project with Supply Chain Management Review, APICS did, and was defining, the typical supply chain manager. And interestingly enough, over half of them came from outside a supply chain function. So the most common track would be engineering, finance, product management, and then operations, of course. One of the other interesting things is when we look at talent development programs, and if you were to use the SCORE framework to kind of break it down, we see about 10% of the employee population really touching the supply chain. So if you're 100,000 employees, there's 10,000 people that are touching the supply chain. If I look at that 10,000 and I break that down, about 10% of that 10,000 is going to be plan make, about 10% is going to be deliver return, about 10% is going to be in that source collaboration and high potentials. And then we have this 70% of it is really focused on what I call the enable part of it. And so within the enable, you've got IT, you've got finance, you've got project and program management, you have product management. And so as we get better at defining kind of who's touching the supply chain, we can understand, what they need to know and then how they get involved.
All right. Well, we are going to leave it there for questions. No, if we didn't get to yours on air, we'll be sure to follow up with you after. Peter and Sean, thank you both for taking the time to share your expertise with us. And everyone who's here, you could have been many places this past hour. We appreciate that you spent it here with us. So this concludes our APICS and Software AG webinar. Have a great day, everyone. And with that, we are done.